This is great.
Let me go ahead and jump in, Mr. Chairman. I just got word that it's okay to begin the meeting.
All right, I now call to order the City County Planning Board virtual work session, February 25th, 2021. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask Mr. King to call the roll, please.
George Bryan.
Here.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Here.
Jason Groves.
Here.
Tommy Hicks. Don't see Mr. Hicks yet. Clarence Lamb.
Here.
Chris Leak.
Here.
Mo McCray.
Here.
Brenda Smith.
Here.
Jack Steelman. Jack, I think you
you're
may be on mute.
Here.
All right, there we go.
All right, I'm going to turn it over then to you, Mr. King, to go with our agenda items, please, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, board members. We have a fairly small agenda today, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in and get started. The first item on your agenda is a continued discussion on NCGS 160D. That's Chapter 160D of the General Statute Text Amendment. As just a recap, you may remember Chris Murphy on our staff did a very thorough and very detailed presentation about this item at your January work session, kind of went through each section in detail. This is combining the city planning statutes, a chapter of the general statutes, with the county and consolidating those into one to kind of have some commonality in terms and usage and verbiage and those kind of things. We did mention that we did have that presentation in January. We also kind of brought it up again at the February public hearing. And our plan was to kind of have Chris just do a very brief summary today. We will be bringing this back to you at your March 11th public hearing for a full presentation and public hearing and a vote there. We are trying to move this through the process. We are required to get this adopted basically by the end of June by the city and the county. So we're going to be moving it on after the March public hearing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris for just kind of a summary and a recap of what we're doing with this text amendment.
Thanks, Aaron. Good afternoon, planning board members. Yeah, as Aaron said, this is a combination of the county planning statutes from 153A and the city statutes from 160A. This has essentially been about a 7.5-year process that was started by a group of municipal or planning related attorneys in the state, and they combined some efforts with legal municipalities and the School of Government to get this process rolling. This is the first comprehensive rewrite of the planning statute since 1905. And similar to our efforts with the changes we made to the UDO to make it more user-friendly and flow better, this is something similar in our mind as far as scope, as far as what they're doing. It's basically rewriting this, making it easier to understand. All the planning legislation in one location for both the city and the county just makes it much more user-friendly. The actual 160D provisions, whenever it was approved by the General Assembly, was 122 pages long. This is a requirement for local governments to have their planning legislations, if in conflict with these provisions, to be amended to match that by June 30th of this year. Those 122 pages of changes only translated to 29 sections, individual sections that we are changing by the information sent to you in your staff report and the proposed text. And that comes out to about 25 pages, but not all of that is actual changes. Synopsis, when I say not actual changes, a lot of that stuff was stuff that was already in the ordinance. It's just part of the section that we're amending. Synopsis of those changes, reference changes, anything that currently references 160A or 153A, we have to change the reference and the appropriate cross section. We didn't call all those out individually. We're just going to do that kind of as a batch process. Same thing with some of the provisions with historic resources. Changes to the vesting to allow more options for vesting, including being able to enter into development agreements between the city and the developer on a large scale project. Some clarifications on what appeals get taken to the Board of Adjustment and kind of what that process is. some clarifications on projects under pending jurisdiction. If someone wants to voluntarily annex a piece of property into another jurisdiction, it actually provides explicit guidance on how that is to be handled now, or how it can be handled. They can stay where they are, or they can bring their proposed project and rezoning review through the body that's getting ready to annex it. There were some provisions related to subdivision, minor subdivision provisions, as far as definitions and the process on how those were approved that were included. There was some additional clarification and explanation provided under conflict of interest provisions for both planning board members and elected body whenever they're considering land use regulations and projects. Clarification on advertising notices in the newspaper, and also how some additional explanation on how citizens can submit comments on projects. And a couple of kind of specific land use related things. There was some information added to the height regulations that specifically exempt amateur radio towers, consistent with what we had been doing. It just had not been in the ordinance, and that's consistent with FCC policy. And also some specific language put in the temporary use provisions dealing with healthcare structures, and those are defined, but that had also actually already been in the general statutes. It had just never been incorporated into our document. With that, I wasn't going to go into detail on what those changes are. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. If I can't answer them today, I'll have you an answer before we meet on the 11th. Again, this has been vetted pretty heavily through the city and the county attorney's office. And again, this is something that we don't have a lot of discretion on whether or not we can approve, there's not discretion. A lot of it has to be done to comply with the statute. So with that, I'll conclude.
Question, Chris.
Yes, sir.
It seems that the word development applications also includes UDO changes. Is that correct?
It does. It does.
Is there a reason they use that language rather than some other language?
I don't have I can't answer what their intent was, but that's similar to, we have development applications, and they run the gamut from zoning board of adjustment all the way through text amendments. You have special use district rezoning projects, you have limited use, you have planning board review and subdivision. We would consider all those development applications. It's just, the ones that go on to the elected body there are, and I'm assuming you're referring to the section where it talks about submitting written comments.
That whole section, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, there was an explanation behind why they called it, probably just more of a generalized term. But again, we kind of use that in our own shop to kind of refer to the generality of all types of development applications that may come in.
Well, it was a lot of work done here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, with all due respect to both Clarence and to Jason, George, please remember that attorneys charge by the word. I'd like to also say, rather to offer a great big thank you to Chris. I sent him some highly anal questions by email last night at 10:30, and they were all answered when I got up this morning. I'll just say to you, as a former bureaucrat, he's on top of this. Thank you, Chris.
Also, it shows that he at
You're
least
welcome.
goes
Thank
to
you.
sleep, unlike you, sir. Staying up to 10:30. I'm impressed.
You got to do something in this virus.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Murphy or the staff? All right, there's no board action required on this, so we can move.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll move on to item 2 on your agenda, and that is a virtual outreach report. So this is an item that was included in your work program that was adopted this year, and obviously this stemmed from really spending pretty much all of 2020 in a virtual meeting environment, just like we're in this afternoon, and just kind of looking around. at some point when the numbers subside with COVID, hopefully we start meeting in person again, but to really look at this virtual meeting situation to see if there are some things that we can carry forward and use even when things begin to return to whatever the new normal is. So Kelly Bennett is on hand. He's going to give a presentation on this. It is a report coming to the board. So your actions would include either adopting the report or adopting parts of it. And you see the recommendations at the end, and that would give us direction to move forward with those. So this is an action item for the board, and I will turn it over to Kelly.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, planning board members. When I'm referring to virtual outreach here, I'm referring to not only reaching out to, but meeting with and gathering input from the public through online platforms. This report will cover best practices for outreach and online meetings. Spoke with other city departments, see what they're doing, specifically marketing and transportation. And then looked at other cities, planning organizations, American Planning Association, to compile these. So virtual outreach, not a new concept that suddenly arrived in March 2020, but what has been new has been holding board and commission meetings and other citizen input meetings exclusively online through Zoom and other similar software. It's actually created a lot of opportunities. More citizens have been able to participate. Our meetings have been more full. We've had more quorums in the Public Art Commission, which is the commission that I manage. We have unanimous attendance at those most often now. Staff can better include stakeholders who feel intimidated by coming out to a public meeting and speaking in front of a large group. And you can share results from surveys and stuff like that instantaneously on the screen. So it's convenient in a lot of ways. The main problems that we've seen are for relying on virtual outreach are that digital divide between citizens with ready access to computers and the internet and those who do not. Ed McNeil, the city's Director of Marketing Communications, thinks that the digital divide might not be as wide as we fear. He points out that most people now are carrying smartphones. People who don't have computers at home often have smartphones. And if they don't have broadband internet access, the city and the county provided in a number of public settings, recreation centers, libraries, places like that. So it's something to consider as we're beginning our countywide comprehensive plan update and moving forward with a number of other long-range plans as we're still living with COVID very much, even though it's off its peaks, it's definitely still here. So I'm going to break down the best practices into virtual outreach, live online meetings, and recorded meetings. I won't go through all of these, so you have them in your report, but virtual outreach, doesn't mean outreach specifically over the internet, but it's one of many tools to reach people. In talking to Ed McNeil specifically, he mentioned that some ways to reach people are actually non-digital ways, from postcards to door hangers to things like that. He mentions some tools that we're very familiar with, like Facebook, and then also Nextdoor, which is kind of a smaller geographic neighborhood by neighborhood social media platform. and then also newspaper ads and things like that. Some of the best practices would be, making websites easier to remember. For our public art plan, we have the website cityofws.org/publicart. It's really easy to make project websites like that. It might be cityofws.org/complan or something like that. Other best practices, translate project information for those with limited English proficiency. And then to really pitch the public input as an opportunity to have a voice in a project and to be able to make a difference. For live online meetings, and this is the one that we've been working with more and more since last March. It's very much like a live meeting, except there are more moving parts now. You need to have somebody helping assist the meeting, like Brian Wilson here, who's changing everybody's titles on the screen and kind of helping route the traffic. But in a lot of ways, it's the same. You want to keep your presentations, even if you have an hour meeting, you want to kind of break it up into bite-sized chunks, into 10 or 15-minute sections so that people don't lose interest. You also want to look professional. You don't want to have a lot of noise behind you, a lot of bad lighting, dogs barking. Some of these things you can't really control, but you want to have your clear meeting agenda, clear talking points, and explain to the public what you want feedback on. For meetings with multiple topics, you can have breakout rooms where you can have a main meeting online, and then if people are interested in certain topics, like where we've kind of broken up area plan meetings. If you're here to talk about the Beltway, go into this room. You can do that online as well. Another best practice is to record your meeting for people who can't attend it live, and you can post the video online. We did this for the public art plan and saw a lot of people using those online videos and then responding to surveys. When you do that, you might want to tweak your presentation. You might want to just, instead of recording the live meeting, you might want to record a video that's more tailored to a recorded video that has more words on the PowerPoint slide and fewer images, so in case people are watching it without their sound on or something like that, they'll be able to get those key takeaways. And then some other things you want to do are to expand those public comment periods, really give people more time to get back to you. If your typical one is a month, maybe make it 6 weeks. So one thing I wanted to share with you all was something that I talked to transportation about. They did this really interesting pedestrian plan, and they hired Alta Planning, a consultant, to help with this. This isn't something that they did in-house, but they have this fantastic map that you can go to, and you can participate anytime you want to, say where you need a sidewalk, where you need a crosswalk, this road is too fast, and you can see just how many people did this. And then, maybe somebody beat you to it. Maybe you said, oh, I really want to talk about 8th Street. And it looks like a lot of people have something to say about 8th Street. So you can click on a comment, you know, there needs to be more crosswalks to get across MLK between Trade and Patterson. And then, you know, it has this social media aspect. So 8 people liked this, 8 people agreed. You can add a comment, you know, you can comment on somebody's comments. So it's really, really a helpful tool. And then, you know, the transportation department gets this back. And it's really a helpful tool for them. Another part of that I found really interesting was they could see where people were commenting, and then by having those comments kind of mapped out, they could see where they were missing, what neighborhoods weren't getting comments. And then they actually reached out to those specific neighborhoods with postcards and door hangers to interview people, because maybe they weren't, you know, they weren't getting the social media posts, things like that. Moving on to recommendations, we have 4 recommendations. And the first one is to embrace virtual meetings. You know, they bring in a lot of people, as I said, who can't make it to a meeting for whatever reason. They can't make it to that specific place because of traveling times, or it's just more convenient to attend it on a computer. I should specify that this doesn't mean, you know, necessarily planning board meetings should stay online forever, because you know, that's up to the state and the city, and this is part of that emergency COVID action. But for area plan meetings, corridor studies, comp plan, things like that, it's probably a good idea to set aside 1 or 2 virtual meetings for those, to get those people who can't make it to your in-person meetings. And then to go along with that, you know, consider the availability of local broadband internet access, you know, in those places where you're studying, where you're doing an area plan. Really consider the libraries and the recreation centers, things like that, where you can get people to access computers there who don't have that at home, and even advertise in those places, put up flyers, things like that. And then invest in multiple outreach methods. Those free social media posts are getting lost, you know, lost in the crowd of social media posts nowadays. You have to pay to boost them, otherwise people don't see them. You can target more. You can target geographically on Facebook and to Twitter, on Twitter to a degree. But then to also, you know, set up your system so that those without computer access can still request information. You can advertise in print, call this phone number, leave your name and address. We'll send you, you know, we'll send you a print survey that you can send back to us. And then the 4th recommendation is to use consultant services when it really benefits the project, and that specialized software. You know, things like that map from Alta, when you're doing, you know, when you're doing a big plan like they did. That was a citywide plan. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Kelly?
Hi.
Hi. When you were doing this, did you think about what staff person would be responsible for the outreach, and whether or not it might make sense to have a dedicated person who could more consistently use these multiple outreach methods, would be kind of like an expert in these methods, so that they could more consistently cover the bases? Or if it's one, based on whoever happens to be doing the project, that they would be responsible?
Kelly, I'd be
Yeah.
glad to answer that question. Melinda, that is something that we've kind of talked about, not just for this project, but in the past as well. As we've you might remember, we did the social media campaign probably the year before COVID started, where we tried to really have a concerted effort to get planning's message out there. And we talked about it, and probably the best thing is, since outreach is at its core one part of an overall project, that we've had the project manager be responsible for that. And I think that's probably still the way that we would recommend going forward. I've talked to some folks as part of that social media outreach campaign with other larger, more we'll say more flushly budgeted municipalities that have maybe had a staff person in the planning department to be a social media coordinator. But frankly, with our workloads and the types of things we're balancing, it's probably best kept to the project manager. And again, they're also the best person to answer questions if anything comes up as a part of that from a citizen.
And we'll often, put our heads together with marketing and communications,
Good. Good.
since they specialize in that when we're at the beginning of a project.
Couple of comments about this. Thank you, Kelly, for putting this together, because I think we probably needed it 8 months ago. I was wondering if in this that we could have some protocols, best practices in terms of the planning board. We are all visible, and I don't know that, Aaron, you ever said we needed to be visible, but we have been, and I really appreciate that. And I do think there should be that expectation, being on the planning board, that we should activate our video unless we have permission from the chair not to do it because of some sickness or skin disease or something like that. You would excuse me, right, Chris?
Of course.
But doing that, but I would also like to see that in the people that are commenting on the planning board, as much as possible, if we could incorporate that into sort of our best practices. The second thing is, if we run into technical difficulties, I think there needs to be a plan in place to say that we will suspend the meeting until something along that line. I can't remember whether it was this group or one of the other groups that I'm part of, when we had a thunderstorm come through Winston-Salem and it was knocking out various areas of the city. I don't want to be excluded from a meeting because of a temporary blackout in my area or something like that. And there ought to be some protocol in place that needs to address that if we're going to be doing virtual along the way. I don't know, Aaron, whether you've checked and compared our numbers now to what our numbers were before virtual, but my sense is that we're not reaching more people with our meetings. And I don't know. I try to watch the numbers at the bottom and sort of get a sense of that. But I think the biggest part of that has been that Fran Daniels was pulled off of this about 2 or 3 years ago with the newspaper. And so there was no reporting on the planning board anymore. And that sort of took it out of the public's sphere on that. I do think there are a whole bunch of ways that we could do a better job with publicity. And you all put this in perspective. I'm in contact with neighborhoods constantly. That's just part of my being and where I'm at with the different groups that I'm a part of. And it is disappeared off of a lot of it where it should be easier. And there are a couple of things I would suggest in there. That first of all, with our agenda, it should be annotated to the section that we're talking about. And I did this for the West End for probably 5, 6, maybe 10 years before HRC finally caught on to that and began annotating their HRC agenda. It makes it so much easier for the public to look at the agenda. They click on an HTML link. It takes them right to the section that concerns them because they're not concerned about the whole agenda. And it's an easy way, it's easy to produce it that way too. So getting that annotated agenda out there will help a lot. We're not using social media sites right now. I mean, the work session used to be publicized in the newspaper. Did you see it in the newspaper today that there was a public meeting that was occurring? They just evidently stopped, unless I'm missing something. I read pretty much cover to cover. We've got to think of different ways to get this out here. Planning is important to people in Winston-Salem. And I never see anything on the Winston-Salem Facebook site. I never see anything on there. And Kelly spent a lot of time talking about querying citizens and things like that. Well, I think this policy and media idea needs to get out there to the communities and say, what would help it? What would help us get our message out to you and our time out to you? That we could use one of these queries that Kelly's been talking about to find out what it is that's going to help get the word out, because I don't think we're anywhere close to tapping what we should be doing along that way. The other thing that I think we need to think about is the next door. I don't know whether you all are familiar with Nextdoor, and it has its advantage, but it is a proprietary thing that is out there in order to capture your email address and other things so they can send you advertisements. I don't know exactly where that is in terms of outreach. Maybe that's okay for us to use systems like that, because it has become fairly well used with neighborhoods, but realize that there is a downside to using sites like that, because that's their basis, is to try to advertise to people and do things along that. Of course, the newspaper tries to advertise too. So, I mean, it's not that much different than the newspaper. But those are just some of my thoughts about this, that we really haven't been very aggressive in the least in getting our message out after the newspaper quit. And I don't see us having the outreach that we should for some of these cases. The other thing is the Community Development Office has begun a neighborhood group and identified some neighborhoods there as well. And so when these issues come up that affect those neighborhoods, that's a quick, easy way to get it out, to try to expand our social media outreach and what is happening to particular neighborhoods that there may be an application for. Thanks.
Could I just say, piggybacking on that, that was kind of what George just expressed. Really, I agree with completely. And that was kind of behind my question about a staff member being responsible for this. I would just like to find a practical way through which we can address some of these issues. And if not a dedicated staff person, then a more articulated plan for the multiple outreach. Something that is more specific, instead of just a smorgasbord of options, really drill down on what's the most effective, as George suggested, like doing a survey to find out what that would be, so that we really have a targeted and a better plan that would actually really get the results that we're looking for. Because as George mentioned, there just isn't the kind of coverage that there used to be of these issues, and that's creating a problem and a lack of awareness of what's going on.
So Melinda, let me make sure I'm clear. When you're talking about kind of doing a survey to find out what the most effective strategies are we talking about specific to the planning board public hearings or kind of future area plan, future comp plan meetings?
I would say any kind of outreach process. I just like to have just a more specific policy regarding outreach that is going to get us the results that we're looking for.
So keep in mind, because it's been brought up a couple times, obviously when we have to legally advertise the meetings in the paper, and we do that, and they show up in advance of the meeting. So ours is in there prior to today. So if you look in today's paper, you're not going to see it, but it's in there in advance. That we frankly don't get a lot of return on sort of eyeballs on that one paragraph ad that is as a canned kind of statement that we've been putting in there for 15 years. It's a requirement of the general statutes that we put it in there, and we do. Obviously, we can't control, when the journal, either Wes Young or Fran Daniel or whoever writes an article, and that's what really generates a lot of coverage for local government issues is when there is a story on something. That's what kind of generates some of those issues, and obviously we can't control that piece of it. What I can tell you is we can certainly, if it would help the board, we can give you sort of a rundown of all the things that we do currently in terms of outreach. As far as there's certainly some things that are required in terms of notification from the state level, and then the things that we do per the UDO. I'm speaking more for your public hearing meetings, where we send letters to everybody within 500 feet. That's above and beyond what's required. We require neighborhood meetings. That's above and beyond what's required. Desmond and I meet with the subcommittee of the Neighborhood Alliance each month to share comments about and go over the zoning cases. It's addition to. And since we've been in COVID, we've been utilizing social media more to get the message out on the city's Facebook pages. Just in preparation of today's meeting, I reached out to the planning directors in Greensboro, High Point, and Kernersville just to see, hey, what new procedures have you guys put in place throughout COVID? And really the only thing that was in there was just social media, frankly, was just utilizing that more. As a staff, I think that's kind of why we were, if there were some, ideal method out there, we certainly would suggest it. I think, George, your comments about the annotated agenda, we can look at that if there's a way to make our materials online more user-friendly. I think we'd need to see what all that entails as far as doing it, but we can certainly take a look at that moving forward. And I certainly think the meeting protocols, we could get you some information on that. What I would say for us is, I think that's something that we would need to kind of do some additional communication back over to the manager's office to make sure that our protocols are consistent with other boards' protocols. We've got 43 of those here in the city. And so I think we have 6 or 7 that we staff just in our department. So I think we can certainly get some information. To my knowledge, there's no sort of citywide protocols that have been established, but we can certainly have that conversation and we can start that conversation because, internally what I can tell you is, should something go wrong, and we've had it go wrong at one of our CAC meetings, we kind of have our internal staff procedures of kind of how we deal with that and move on and continue the meeting. But yeah, we can, and we certainly don't want to broadcast that to folks, but we can certainly get some information on that if that would be helpful.
As to a whole lot of what you just said, Aaron, and golly Pete, I don't want to create a multi-headed monster because sometimes there are too many cooks in the kitchen. I also don't want to create a higher level of division between departmental activities and programs, silos. Is there just cause to turn to the marketing department, Ed and his staff, and say, here's something each of these departments need. Can you help us put together a coordinated City of Winston-Salem strategy rather than every department acting independently?
We can certainly have that conversation with them, and that's something that, as Kelly kind of referenced, when we kind of go out, especially for planning, area plans and things of that nature, and certainly when we embark on the comp plan, we're going to want to utilize them, and we really did this a lot with them through the census. I mean, as we were kind of the department that was leading up the complete count committee, we don't have expertise in marketing and outreach, and so we leaned on Ed and his team. To provide that real expertise there. And so certainly when we do the comp plan and as we've done on area plans, we're going to lean on them to tell us, what their best advice is on that. They're the experts in those areas.
The other thing, sort of unrelated just to that I want to go on and say is, I'm a firm believer and supporter in our always saying we need more tools in the tool chest. And this is certainly another tool that could be incredibly helpful to us. At the same time, I want to ask how we keep unrelated replies and contents off of our sites. How do we keep abuse down? Misuse.
I'm sorry, can you explain that a little further? I'm not sure I follow exactly what you're.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people using social media for their own agendas rather than for its intended agenda.
So as far as the city does have a social media policy, and so there is somebody in Ed's shop in marketing communication that oversees that and does moderate that to make sure anything that's going on there is compliant with that city policy. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or am I missing you?
I'm not sure what that meant, so I'll just be real blunt and say, I think there are a whole lot of individuals and organizations in this country today that are up to absolutely no good and will do anything they can to influence people into their camp. And I don't want our walls so penetrated.
Okay.
If that makes, if that's more direct.
I'm sure I still got you, Jack. I'll just be honest with you. Maybe it's just over my head on that one.
Oh, I think it's just monitoring comments, right? So removing some comments that are inappropriate or that maybe are not like in line with, there really shouldn't be too many discussions about setbacks in terms of like social matters. I don't, you know what I mean? I think
social matters, political matters, things not related to the
so
agenda.
that it's not so much political rather than practical, I think is what Jack is trying. It's just comment monitoring.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I
Already...
would assume someone is doing that now. If there's an inappropriate comment, I would hope someone is monitoring that and removing that expeditiously.
That's happening citywide, and yeah, you got to be pretty careful when you start getting into that because of free speech issues and all the things around that. But that is already taking place at the city level.
And the other thing I would like to say is, though I'm all for our having more tools in our chest, I will also say, in my experience, there is invaluable things that take place face to face, person to person, with spontaneity and network building and so forth. So I would just ask us to maintain a balance between the two.
Yeah, I would say that's a very good point, Jack. I agree with you on that. And that kind of brings up the example that was given about the pedestrian plan and the map, which I think is very good. It's a great interactive map, and it is a great tool. But I think that we need to balance that also against a more nuanced discussion that information you can get via the public meeting and not simply use those electronic tools as a replacement for that other bit of input.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we're crystal clear on that, because I certainly, that was not the intent. It was to use Zoom and other tools in lieu of, it is, or in addition to. I want to make 100% clear, and I think that's kind of what Kelly was kind of alluding to, is we still want to do the in-person events just like we always have, but how can we enhance and add to and cast a wider net to get additional information and give folks opportunities to comment, whether it be through surveys or virtual meetings or mailers or whatever. What can we do in addition to? But it was certainly not to replace.
Sure. Yeah, but my point really is with regard to surveys. Sometimes surveys can be written in such a way that they leave out certain options. And so if we say, going from the survey, this is what the number one choice was, when certain other choices weren't even there, it's good to have the public comment to express the fact that maybe that survey wasn't as complete as it should have been. And I've been involved in certain processes where we relied too heavily on the survey, in my opinion.
Aaron, could I just expound a little bit more on some of the board members' questions here?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't remember who brought this up initially, but certainly staff has had conversations with marketing and communications at several points, both in general and on various projects in recent years, about how we best marshal existing city communication resources and reach the public for various projects. So certainly social media, and that's where we learned about the power of boosting our posts and geofencing posts to a certain area, things of that we all learned from the city's basically social media coordinator, which kind of is the person citywide who works with departments to facilitate some of the things the board has talked about. Another point that I'll bring up is back in 2012 or so, when social media was becoming a big thing, we actually did a survey as a department that we had on our website as a link that folks could click on, and we sent it to some folks that were working with us on area plans and things. And we had about 5 categories about how did you find out about this meeting or the zoning case, whatever you clicked on. And even at that time, print media advertisement, which we still did a good bit of, quarter page ads for area plans and things of that nature, that was dead last at the time. The things that did it for folks were neighbor to neighbor contact. That was number 1. And then social media was number 2. So anecdotally, those are kind of the things that we've been focusing on. And another tool that we've really found has been successful is individual mailers to folks if you're within a reasonable area, like a corridor study or things of that nature. So I just wanted to, since we have some newer board members like Miss McCrae who may not be aware of some of that background information, I did want to let everyone on the board know that staff, this isn't the first cut we've taken at some of these social media things. This was really just intended to be what's kind of a best management practices for moving forward in a post-COVID world.
Well, I'd just like to say, to the staff's credit, the technology and the developments in that regard around social media are changing so rapidly. George made reference to who saw it in the newspaper, and I'd be willing to bet you that the percentage of people 45 years of age and younger that read a newspaper in print every day is probably in the single digits at this point. But you look at the time period that went from the chief news source being a newspaper to radio, and then radio to TV, TV to internet, and then compare that to the amount of time TV to social media and beyond. It's changing so rapidly that it's hard to put your finger on which is the best method to communicate with. And so, we're trying to hit a moving target here a little bit. And, all social media is designed to glean as much information about you and from you as they possibly can, including Facebook and Twitter and everything else. It's not just next door. Facebook wrote the book on selling people's data to other organizations. So, it is difficult. We're navigating a brave new world, to borrow a phrase. So.
Well, Kirk, have you thought about using the water bill inserts? Everybody gets those bills, and if you could just put a project's web address, and say these are the projects that we're working on now, that might reach a lot of people.
Over
Melinda,
the next 2 months.
That's actually a good point, Melinda. My recollection is we did do that. It was either as part of the original Legacy or Legacy 2030. But the catch with that for a lot of projects is there's a big lead time that you have to get that in there. So for more of a truncated process, that may not work. But the bigger thing is there's various other projects that may have already staked out that turf and how much space is available. But again, you bring up a very good point, and that is certainly something that we will look into as we go forward, certainly with the comp plan update and any of the larger things that we're working on.
We did it with the census, I think.
The other point that I wanted to bring up, again, the water bill thing is kind of a good example of this, but one thing that marketing and communications has taught us is that the type of outreach or communication that works well for one project may not reach folks for another project. Certainly, one of the negatives of the water bill thing is, I know I'm guilty of this myself sometimes, is I'm in a rush. I just kind of recycle the little inserts and just look for the meat, if you will. So there's certainly pros and cons to different things. There's some the demographics in some areas are more prone to be targeted for certain things, but we definitely want to partner with the experts. We want to partner with the board in terms of you all's insight. And, you know, this is something that Paul brought up a few years ago. We put together a list of neighborhood organizations and we tried to make sure that we kept that up to date. Anything that you all have that can help us kind of reach neighborhoods, it's certainly an open invitation, and we want to do all we can to get the board's work and kind of those meeting invites out there.
Just on the Alta map for the pedestrian, I think that's a wonderful tool for the comp plan and other ways that we talk about kind of meatier documents, to have maps that people are visually associating large pieces of text with that they find actionable, is a really way to make zoning text accessible, right? So we talk about it reaching people, but we also need to understand that it's how people read it, and that people kind of get bogged down with Muni code, right? It's exciting to all of us, and but it's a lot for someone to care about all of it if they're very, very just neighborhood focused or very walkability focused. And so it kind of allows that opportunity for people to comment on things that they really care about, which is what we want in community engagement. And it's not, if we've got the funds to implement something like that, because it does take quite a bit of funds to do that, I think that that's a well worth effort for us to engage on, and we'll probably get a lot of traction locally.
We like that, and I think if Amy's still on there, Amy can maybe mention, I think we did some of that, or our consultant did, with the downtown streetscape master plan. We had, we kind of had some interactive maps there where folks could do some similar work, obviously a smaller geography there than sort of the citywide map. But Amy, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, we did with the downtown streetscape plan, we did do that. And we also, I mean, we held meetings as well. So we did a joint sort of dual process. And we also, what allowed having a website and having a survey online allowed us to do is you can take that survey link and you can easily distribute it. And so you can get creative in how you distribute that, that link. We did it through, back in the time when people were really going out, we did it through coasters in the downtown area. For the Parks and Open Space Plan update, we did little postcards through the Festival of Lights that had the web link. So you get it out slightly different ways than you would for maybe for a Facebook post or a newspaper. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility in how you actually get that out. And you can be a little bit more creative. And also, I think depending on, sort of generationally, a lot of, sort of your younger generation, they're going to go through the survey and do things sort of online, but it also helps to have the in-person as well if they wanted to provide more additional comments, or having a place within the survey they can, for additional comments, write them here, or, have the other category in your, questions, so that people, if they don't, if something else pops into mind that's not specifically listed, to do that. But I just actually looked, because I know there was a question earlier about reaching folks, and I just looked at the Community Appearance Awards, and usually those are in person. They're typically always in person, and they're held over at Old Salem. This year, due to COVID, we actually had to do it online and did a sort of webinar based. And in the in-person one, we typically got maybe 100, 120 people in attendance. This time around, we've had 241 views on that video. So what that allows is for folks who may not be able to come that particular day can still watch it 2 days later, or later on that night when they have a moment, or whatever time. And then it sort of just provides another avenue. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is just to provide as many avenues as we can to get the word out and get people's input in the best way possible.
I think Jason's comments were very appropriate. This is a moving target, and you were going to have different ways of trying to get the word out. But I think we're all clear. We would love to see more visibility for planning issues in our community. I think we're all on the same page on that.
Yeah, if I could just make one other comment. What based on what Amy was talking about, putting up the Community Appearance Commission awards online, I think that's a really, really important point, to be able to view these webinars after they've taken place. That multiplies, the number of people who can see it. I wish they had done that for the pedestrian plan on their site. You just see a map. And some of those meetings that they held, if there was a way to get the recorded meetings attached, I think that would be a big bonus there. And we should be doing that for everything that we do.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
definitely
Great.
did that for the public art plan, and saw some reviews and people using the survey after looking at the video, the recorded video.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Great comments. I think we're all heading in the same direction. This item does require board action. Would anyone like to make any more comments, or would any board member like to move it forward?
I'd like to move approval or recommend approval, whatever the necessary next step is.
All right. There's motion by Mr. Stillman,
Second, Clarence.
second by Mr. Lamb. Mr. King, is a roll call appropriate at this point?
Correct. We will need to do a roll call for this item.
For all four?
Just for this item. Just for this one. Whenever you're ready. I don't know if you need any more comments or discussion, but whenever you're ready, we'll need to do a roll call vote.
I think we're ready.
Okay. George Bryan?
I think it needs more work, so I'm voting no.
Okay. Melinda Dunnigan?
I agree with George. So I guess I have to vote no as well.
Okay. Jason Grubbs?
Yes.
Tommy Hicks is still not here. Clarence Lamb?
Yes.
Chris Leak?
Yes.
Mo McCray?
Yes.
Brenda Smith?
You're on mute, Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman?
Yes, and I would just add, with the understanding that I believe it's going to get a whole lot more work. We just got to get started.
It will, and to be sure, I think we've shared with you previously. We're in the process of doing some literature review as part of our comp plan kind of education piece of doing other reviews of other comp plans that have won some awards at the APA level and that have gotten some attention that we think are good examples to review. And I think that's one of the real key pieces of that is in pretty much all of those plans. There's number one, a big focus on outreach, and there's a multi sort of pronged approach to that. And two, there's a real focus on sort of tracking and capturing the participation just either in number of responses, people, events, geography, all of those things. So I think that was a good learning point from staff. I think that's something you'll see, especially as we move into the next comp plan, that before we down the road much further, before we embark on any kind of public facing part of that, we're going to want to present that process to you and share some of our ideas there. So I just did want to mention that as well.
And Aaron, so my first planning job was doing the comp plan for Baltimore City. If you need and they did it virtually and in person. So if you need a contact there, let me know.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, if you're ready for the next item, it is item number 3 on your agenda. That is our downtown investment report. And I believe we've got Steve Smotherman. There he is. This is something that we bring to you each February. We compile this data. This is kind of a look at really what has happened in our downtown area. It's kind of a rolling 10-year total, also with a focus on kind of what's happened over the last year. And this is something we generally present at the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership Awards, which took place 3 hours ago. So we did a soft opening there. Steve is going to go ahead and just kind of go through this with you. So Steve, if you're ready, go ahead and unmute and you can begin. Steve, you're still muted.
Okay, here we go. So,
all right.
when I first started this process, I was wondering if we were going to have much investment, but fortunately, we had about $64 million of investment this year. Our 10-year total, which is 1.773 billion, is slightly more than last year, believe it or not. But that's probably more of a case where we added more investment than we took out. In the next couple of years, I think we'll be losing a little bit more investment, particularly in the middle years of last decade, because there was a big boom in those years. But it goes to show just how much investment has been going on. If you look, you can see the amounts in the different categories, 292 million or 93 million residential over the last 10 years, 352 million institutional and public uses, 354 million in health and technology, which is primarily in innovation quarter, 94 million in commercial, 67 million in office development, 16 million in arts and entertainment, 346 million in mixed use or multiple uses, which also has commercial and office in it. And this year we had a new use. It was an upfit of 161,000 for an industrial use. And the infrastructure costs remain the same. There was no new addition this year. So again, we had a total of 64 million of investment in the downtown area this year. Amy, if you could go to the next table. And this kind of breaks out. Go ahead, Amy, to the pie charts. If you look at this top pie chart, it shows how they're spread out among the different categories, and it's fairly balanced. You've got 20% of the investment in health and technology, 20% in multiple uses, and 20% in institutional public uses, and close to that is 17% in residential. If you look at the second chart, you can see that primarily most of our investment was in regards to a announced apartment and parking deck development, very similar to the Easley that is proposed on Trade Street north of Martin Luther King Drive. It's similar to the Easley because the developer is the same as the one developing the Easley, DPJ Residential, and they've also developed West End Station. So just like Grubb Properties and the different Link apartments that are located around downtown, DPJ Residential is working on their third project. So we've got two companies that are doing multiple projects downtown right now. Okay, Amy, if you can go to the last one. And this year, because we haven't had quite as much investment, again, the main one was the Industrial Hill Area Apartments and Parking Deck in 800 block of North Trade Street. The next highest investment was $4 million for upfits to Wake Downtown, which is in the Innovation Quarter. And then the next highest was $3 million in upfits to 500 West 5th Street or Flow Towers. So our investments have gone down. They were in the last 2 or 3 years on a yearly basis. I think the investment in 2018 was 238 million. Investment last year was 178 million, and the investment this year is 64 million. So I'm thrilled that our 10-year rounded value is up from last year, but I don't know if that will continue in the next year unless we have another boom period. So we'll see what happens. But it goes to show how much has happened in the downtown area in the last decade. It really shows that I didn't imagine we would have this much investment when we were talking about trying to encourage investment downtown with Legacy 2030. And I have been thrilled with the amount of activity that's been going on. And I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
But yeah, I'm always happy to jump into downtown. Steve, thank you very much. And perhaps this question is one of wordsmithing and intent more than anything else. Some of the projects, for instance, in 2019, the Stevens Center, 2020, the new residential, they're not yet investments, they're announcements. And I would just ask if we're using the correct word to reflect the intent of the report.
Yeah, Steve, you want to kind of go through your methodology, because that's something we always make sure we're careful of each year as we compile this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of started with Paul Norber. We've called it investments, but we do announcements. And granted, the Stevens Center's last year's announcement, and it's still an announcement, but we have a thing that if nothing happens within a 3 or 4 year period from that announcement, we will remove it from the list. And the same thing goes with the Industry Hill area apartments and parking deck this
Right.
year. But we have included announcements in the past.
And the kaleidoscope and
All that.
Yeah.
We don't include, so that, because of that, when the building permits come in, we don't include those in subsequent years, unless actually the building permits came in higher than their announcement. So we bumped that up. They announced at 45 million, their permits actually came in at 46.8. So we bumped it up 1.8 million. But in most cases that doesn't happen, but we try to keep up with it.
And the other somewhat related question to building permit valuations. Have you ever done, Steve, any breakdown on of those downtown investment dollars? How much is tax base and how much is not?
No, because that is very difficult. Because the simple thing would be to assume that the institutional public are not taxable, but some of those, as some of the institutional users are getting into more, their retail uses with some nonprofits and all that, it is getting more and more difficult to know exactly how much is of each individual investment is taxable and how much is not.
Jack,
So-
I'll add in on that. We publish our development dashboard throughout the year, and one of the things on the back side of that, you may know, at the top there's the top 10 highest value developments, and then on the bottom half there's a map that shows where those are. And one of the things when we distribute that to our elected officials, they are rightly concerned, what is this? That they would see the values on there and say, well, this is great. And then when the tax values aren't going up, they would say, wait a minute, but you're telling us there's all this stuff going on here. And so I remember asking Steve and Kirk this a while ago to say, hey, can we go back in and start to do some statistics to see, at least on that end, the development report, to see what percentage is taxable and how that works.
Right.
And as Steve mentioned, I thought that was a very easy task. And when we got into it, we quickly found out that was a very complicated task to go in and dive in and figure out. So I think the same holds true for the downtown piece there.
This is Clarence. It may be a difficult task, but it's probably worthy of some energy, because if I just add those things up, you're talking about half of your 1.7 billion could conceivably be generating zero property tax dollars. And, that's something to think about, because we're getting ready to build a new courthouse downtown. It's going to generate $0. And if you build enough of it, if your investment ends up doing what it is ending up doing right now, it is creating move outs from Class A buildings like Wells Fargo Tower, the BB&T Green Building, 1 West 4th. You can add up about 400,000 or 500,000 feet of Class A office vacancy right there. When those buildings get to the 50%, here's the side impact that people don't think about. when those buildings get to a 50% vacancy or something like that, they generate zero net operating income because of the operating expenses, the OpEx, the heating, the cooling, the janitorial, all that kind of stuff, security, property tax, and insurance. And when NOI, when net operating income gets close to zero, the value of the building from an appraisal standpoint, and therefore from a tax appeal standpoint, approaches zero as well, because those are all income properties and they're based on a cap rate that's applied, capitalization rate that's applied to that net operating income. So it really is probably worth digging into when your central business district, your CBD, is developing 3 Class A vacancies in excess of 50%. It's really something to look at.
Yeah, Clarence, we could certainly hit some of, obviously the courthouse at 140 million. We know that one. We know the business 40. Those are clearly non-taxable improvements. I mean, there's certainly some big ones in there that we could do. I think when you start getting into innovation quarter and who's using what for what purpose, those are when we kind of realize this was a little bit tougher endeavor. But certainly there are some just no-brainer clear ones we could put some metrics to. And I think you raise a good point that is something that certainly our staff is keeping a close eye on and thinking about and reading up on is, what these sort of long-term impacts to office spaces are after COVID, or are folks going to be returning to the office? And if they don't, then what does that mean for a lot of the office space that's already out there? If it doesn't get repurposed for office, then what are some other uses? So that is something that we're closely keeping an eye on.
Things like the Stevens Center and the Kaleidoscope and the courthouse and the convention center and the churches are all wonderful, wonderful assets to downtown.
They are.
And they're economic contributors in ways other than revenue back to the cities and county.
Sure.
I think those are great educational points for those who don't realize that. A lot of people don't really understand
the library.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Aaron, is it of any benefit to answer Clarence's question? There are people in the city that do that. Planners are jack of all trades and master of none, and I don't claim to be a master of the tax implications. But I know that our budget or finance department does look at revenue forecasts and things like that. I don't know if they go into how much detail they go into, but I didn't know if it's worthy of having somebody from one of those departments speak to how they go about doing their tax revenue forecasting.
Very simplistically, if we're listing the Stevens Center, that's a $40 million investment, and they sell wine and beer, forget that part of it. That's statistically insignificant. But innovation quarter is more of a hybrid. Understood.
Yeah. What I can tell you from a big picture, a couple of good takeaways on this. We still have our 2 large apartment projects, the Link on 4th Street that is under construction, that began in the middle of COVID, and easily at Peters Creek First at that intersection is well underway. I think those were 2 projects that staff was a little concerned about given the impacts of COVID as to whether or not they move forward. So I think that says a lot about our downtown and the vibrancy and the strength of it, that both of those projects moved forward in the middle of the pandemic. And Clay Grubb, who is the developer of the Link apartment developments here in Winston-Salem and develops all over the Southeast, he was the keynote speaker at today's Downtown Winston-Salem partnership and mentioned that Winston-Salem was his top performing market out of all his markets. So again, I think that's an encouraging sign for all of us here. That's something that we've been pushing for in Legacy, and Legacy 2030 is to get more folks living downtown and spending more time downtown. And so that was a good indicator. While a lot of our restaurants and bars and retail establishments have had some tough times due to COVID for obvious reasons, it was good to see those developments move forward. So I just want to share that. And it is likely we have him tentatively scheduled for your March work session. It's been a while since we've had Jason Thiel come and speak to the board. So we're going to invite Jason over in March to spend some time and just talk about all things downtown, things related to COVID downtown, and kind of some of the things they're working on. So we'll have a little bit more discussion in March related to downtown.
The only other thing I would say relative to my last question is sometimes if we oversell downtown by how well it's doing, the unintended reaction is then we, the city, we, the county, don't need to help it out as much as we used to because it's doing well on its own. So you got to walk a really fine line there.
Fair point.
Are there any other comments on the downtown investment report? All right, thank you, Steve.
It's all good news.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go to our debriefing from our public hearing meeting on February the 11th. Are there any thoughts, comments, or questions?
I had a comment.
Yes.
I would like us to consider, when we have text amendments that are somewhat complex, to have built into the process a little more in the way of public input and maybe even stakeholder give and take, to make sure that people understand what is being proposed and especially if there are a lot of details to it. And in that regard, something that I didn't quite understand at our last meeting, but I do now, that the way in which the text amendment was presented, I think was inherently confusing to the public, because I've heard this a couple of times from a couple of different people, that there were two parts to it. There was MUS and then there was the cottage court. And when people who, were coming at this just without a lot of experience looking at text amendments, were thinking that this was just an MUS text amendment that had cottage court as a subpart, the cottage court being allowed in MUS, and that was basically it. And so it takes a while for people to understand something like this that has all these parts to it, especially if it's basically two separate text amendments put together as one. And I think that we should be aware of that as we go forward.
So noted. Anyone else? All right. Moving to the staff report, Mr. King.
Yeah, just two items. March 16th, we will be going to the Community Development Housing General Government Committee. And at this point, it looks like it will be largely devoted to items coming out of our department. We will be talking about cottage courts at that meeting. That committee had asked us back in August to prepare some information on accessory dwelling units. We'll be talking about that there as well. We brought an item to them in February regarding the sign amortization within the city. They asked for some more information, so we'll be bringing that back to them there as well. And then Kelly prepared the public art master plan that actually went through the Public Art Commission last fall, and due to COVID and some other delays, we'll be presenting that there as well. So we will have a busy day at Council Committee on March 16th. So just wanted to let everybody know those items were coming through the process there. And just one other just kind of item of note, you may remember on your work program that was adopted this year, one of the items we had was kind of reaching out to some of the colleges and universities to talk to them about the need to kind of promote planning as a career path to folks of diverse backgrounds, to try to generate some more interest in that. And so we are actually going to be starting our first effort there. Samuel Hunter and myself will be reaching out to Dr. Herr, who is the chair of the planning program at East Carolina University, on Monday. She was receptive to our invitation, so we're glad she's willing to spend some time with us to talk about that. we'll kind of see how that first one goes, and we'll kind of swap some notes, and then we'll be prepared to kind of move on down the list. I think we've got 8 colleges and universities in the state of North Carolina that we're going to be reaching out to over the next several months. So it's exciting to kind of go out there and get the word out and speak with some of the universities about this profession. So those are just only 2 things I just kind of wanted to mention to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. That's a great effort right there too. Is there anything else for the good of the order? If not,
Give me today on my being mute. Just a motion to adjourn, and I do hope everyone's gotten a chance to enjoy this beautiful weather the last couple of days. And hang in there. I think we'll have more before too much longer.
thank you. All right, everyone have a great evening.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.